Imagine a weapon so sharp it could split a silk scarf falling through the air, yet so feared that its mere presence on the battlefield could make entire armies retreat. A blade that wasn't just steel, it was considered the soul of a warrior, capable of cutting through armor, bone, and legend itself. But the world of the samurai holds far more than the iconic katana you've seen in films. Hidden in the shadows of feudal Japan are weapons so deadly, so ingeniously designed, that they redefined what it meant to kill with precision. Blades folded 1,000 times until they became sharper than surgical scalpels. Weapons disguised as farming tools that could decapitate a man in a single motion. Secret techniques passed down through bloodlines, each one more lethal than modern combat knives. These weren't just tools of war, they were extensions of a warrior philosophy steeped in mystery, carved into history by forgotten masters who spent lifetimes perfecting the art of death. Today, we'll uncover the 5 most lethal samurai weapons ever created, each one more devastating than the last. And the first one? It's not what you think. Weapon 5. The kusarigama, the chain sickle of deception. Picture a farmer working in the rice fields of 16th century Japan. He looks harmless, bent over his crops with a simple sickle in hand. But this is no farmer. This is an assassin. And that sickle? It's attached to a 12-foot chain with a weighted iron ball that can crush a skull from across the room. The kusarigama was the ultimate weapon of deception. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a farming tool, a curved blade used to harvest crops. But in the hands of a trained shinobi or samurai, it became something far more sinister. The chain could be whipped around to ensnare an opponent's sword, rendering their weapon useless. And while they struggled to free their blade, the sickle would come slashing across their throat. But here's where it gets truly terrifying. The weighted end of the chain, usually a heavy iron ball or sometimes a sharp spike, could be swung in wide arcs, keeping multiple attackers at bay. Warriors would spin it overhead like a helicopter blade, creating an impenetrable zone of death. Anyone who stepped within 12 feet was in range. Anyone who tried to rush in would have their legs swept out from under them, their sword yanked from their grip, or their skull shattered by the weight. What made the kusarigama so lethal wasn't just its versatility, it was the psychological warfare it created. Opponents never knew where the next attack would come from. The chain, the sickle, the weight? All 3 could strike in rapid succession, and there was no defense manual for this. Samurai, trained for years in sword combat, were completely unprepared for an enemy who fought at variable ranges, switching between close and long-distance attacks in the blink of an eye. Historical records tell us that one master of the kusarigama, a warrior named Yamada Shinryu-kan, killed over 30 armed samurai in duels without ever being struck himself. His secret? He would lure opponents into attacking, then use the chain to trap their blade mid-swing. Before they could react, the sickle was already at their neck. But as deadly as the kusarigama was, it required years of training to master. One wrong move, and the chain could wrap around your own arm, or the weight could swing back and strike you instead. It was a weapon for specialists, for those willing to dedicate their lives to unconventional warfare. And that brings us to a weapon even more unexpected, one that turned the samurai's greatest weakness into their most devastating strength. Weapon 4. The tanto, the blade of last resort. When a samurai's katana broke in battle, when they were disarmed and cornered, when honor demanded one final act of defiance, they reached for the tanto. This short dagger, barely longer than a human forearm, was the weapon of desperation. But don't let its size fool you. Ounce for ounce, inch for inch, the tanto may have been the most lethal blade a samurai ever carried. The tanto was designed for one purpose: to penetrate armor. While swords could slash and cut, they often failed against the thick leather, chainmail, and iron plates worn by elite warriors. The tanto, with its triangular or chisel-shaped blade, could punch through these defenses like a needle through fabric. Its short length meant it could be thrust with devastating force at close range, targeting the gaps in armor, under the arm, behind the knee, at the throat. But here's what made the tanto truly terrifying. It was the weapon samurai used when everything else had failed. When they were grappling on the ground, when they'd been thrown from their horse, When an enemy had closed the distance and was trying to wrestle them down, the tanto appeared. One quick draw from the belt, one precise thrust, and the fight was over. There are accounts from the Sengoku period of samurai using tanto blades to kill opponents through their helmets. The blade would be driven upward through the underside of the jaw, piercing the brain in an instant. It required incredible strength and precision, but it was a technique taught to every samurai from childhood. The tanto wasn't just a backup weapon, it was the last line between life and death. What's even more chilling is the tanto's role in seppuku, ritual suicide. When a samurai was defeated or dishonored, they would use their tanto to disembowel themselves in one of the most painful deaths imaginable. This act required a blade sharp enough to cut through thick abdominal muscle in a single draw, yet balanced enough to control with absolute precision. The tanto had to be perfect, because there was no room for error. A dull blade would make the process agonizing and dishonorable. Master swordsmiths spent months forging a single tanto, folding the steel hundreds of times until it achieved a hardness that could pierce armor but retained enough flexibility to not shatter on impact. The result was a blade that could outlast generations, passed down from father to son, each one carrying the blood of dozens of enemies. But the tanto had a weakness: its range. At just 6 to 12 inches, it required the wielder to be dangerously close to their opponent. This is why samurai also carried a longer, more versatile weapon, one that could kill at medium range with surgical precision. And that weapon? It changed the very nature of samurai warfare. Weapon 3, the wakizashi, the honor blade. Every samurai carried two swords, a pair known as the daisho. The katana, the longer blade, got all the glory. But the wakizashi, the shorter companion sword, was equally deadly. In fact, in certain situations, it was even more dangerous. The wakizashi was typically between 12 and 24 inches long, longer than a dagger, shorter than a full sword. This length was perfect for indoor combat. In the narrow corridors of Japanese castles, in the cramped quarters of a tea house, or during surprise attacks inside a lord's chamber, the katana was too long to be effective. It would strike walls, get caught on door frames, or be too slow to draw in tight spaces. But the wakizashi? It could be unsheathed in a fraction of a second and used immediately. Samurai trained extensively in bata-jutsu, the art of drawing and cutting in one motion. With a wakizashi, this technique became lightning fast. An assassin could bow respectfully to a target, then in the same fluid movement, draw the wakizashi and slash across the victim's throat before they even realized what had happened. But here's where the wakizashi's true lethality reveals itself. It was the only sword samurai were allowed to wear indoors. When entering a castle or a lord's home, warriors had to leave their katana at the door as a sign of respect. But the wakizashi stayed with them. This created a dangerous loophole. A samurai who appeared to be disarmed still carried a blade capable of killing in an instant. Historical assassination records show that more high-ranking officials were killed with wakizashi blades than any other weapon, precisely because it could be concealed and deployed in places where other swords were forbidden. One famous incident involved a samurai named Seiken Nosuke, who was attacked by assassins while riding in a palanquin. His guards couldn't defend him with their katanas in the confined space, but the attackers used wakizashi blades to stab through the thin wooden walls, killing Nosuke before he could escape. The wakizashi also played a crucial role in seppuku rituals. While the tanto was sometimes used for the initial cut, it was the kaishakunin, the appointed second, who would use a wakizashi to perform the final decapitation, ending the dying samurai's suffering. This required a blade sharp enough to sever the spinal column in a single strike, yet precise enough to leave a small piece of skin connecting the head to the body, as tradition demanded. Only a perfectly balanced wakizashi could achieve this. But before moving on, I would like to ask you for something. If you like these documentaries and want to support me, please consider subscribing. It's free. What made the wakizashi even more formidable was its versatility. It was light enough for rapid strikes but heavy enough to deliver killing blows. Samurai could fight with both the katana and wakizashi simultaneously, a technique called niten ichi, where the longer blade would parry while the shorter one struck. This dual-wielding style was nearly impossible to defend against, because opponents had to track two blades moving independently. But the wakizashi, for all its advantages, was still limited by one thing. It was a close-range weapon. A samurai armed only with a wakizashi would be at a severe disadvantage against an opponent with a longer blade. This is why they needed a primary weapon, one that combined reach, cutting power, and the ability to strike with lethal precision from multiple angles. That weapon became the symbol of the samurai itself. Weapon 2. The naginata, the blade that conquered battlefields. Before the katana became legendary, before the samurai became synonymous with the sword, there was the naginata, a weapon so devastating on the battlefield that it was considered the king of melee combat. Imagine a sword blade mounted on a 6-foot pole, wielded with the sweeping motions of a scythe. Now imagine a warrior swinging that blade in wide arcs, cutting through multiple enemies in a single motion, keeping attackers at a distance where their swords couldn't reach. The naginata was the great equalizer. A skilled fighter with this weapon could hold off multiple opponents simultaneously because of its incredible reach advantage. While an enemy samurai would need to close within 3 feet to strike with a katana, the naginata wielder could cut them down from 6 or 7 feet away. By the time an attacker got close enough to use their sword, they'd already been slashed across the legs, disemboweled, or decapitated. But here's what made the naginata truly terrifying on the battlefield. It was designed to cut down cavalry. In feudal Japan, mounted samurai were the elite shock troops, crashing through infantry lines with devastating force. But a naginata wielder could slash at the horse's legs, bringing both mount and rider crashing to the ground. Once dismounted, the heavily armored samurai became slow, vulnerable targets. A quick thrust to the throat or a downward strike to the neck, and the fight was over. Historical battle accounts describe naginata warriors creating zones of death around themselves. Enemies couldn't approach without being cut, and the wide, sweeping strikes meant there was no safe angle of attack. One famous naginata master, a warrior monk named Benkei, reportedly held off an entire army on a bridge, killing hundreds of soldiers before finally being overwhelmed. Even then, he died standing upright, his body held in place by the dozens of arrows that had pierced him. But the naginata wasn't just a weapon for battlefield chaos. It required incredible skill and years of training to master. The blade had to be swung in continuous circular motions, building momentum with each rotation. A skilled naginata fighter could chain together strikes so rapidly that their weapon appeared as a blur, the blade constantly in motion, creating an impenetrable defensive sphere. Stop the motion, and you lost your advantage. Keep it spinning, and you were untouchable. Women of the samurai class, the onabugeisha, were particularly deadly with the naginata. While cultural restrictions limited their access to swords, the naginata became their weapon of choice for defending homes and castles, and they were exceptional with it. Historical records tell of women using naginata to kill male samurai in single combat, their speed and technique overcoming raw strength. One famous onabugeisha, Tomoe Gozen, was said to have decapitated multiple enemy generals with her naginata during the Genpei War. The weapon's design was deceptively simple, a curved blade between 1 and 3 feet long, mounted on a wooden shaft. But the balance was everything. Too heavy, and the wielder would tire quickly. Too light, and the strikes wouldn't have enough force to cut through armor. Master craftsmen spent years perfecting the weight distribution, creating weapons that felt weightless in skilled hands yet struck with the force of a battering ram. But the naginata had one critical weakness. It required space. In narrow corridors or dense formations, the long shaft became a liability. This is why, as warfare evolved and battles moved from open fields to castle sieges and urban combat, the naginata began to decline in use. And in its place rose a weapon that would define the samurai for centuries to come. A blade so perfect in its design, so devastating in its execution, that it became more than just a tool of war. It became a work of art, a spiritual object, and the deadliest close combat weapon ever created. Weapon 1, the katana, the soul of the samurai. The katana wasn't just a sword. It was a samurai's soul, their identity, their honor forged into steel. And make no mistake, this blade earned its legendary status through sheer lethality. A properly forged katana could slice through bone, cartilage, and muscle with such ease that victims sometimes didn't realize they'd been cut until their bodies began to separate. The secret lay in the forging process. Master swordsmiths would take raw tamahagane steel, a high-carbon iron produced in traditional Japanese furnaces, and fold it over and over, sometimes more than 1,000 times. Each fold removed impurities and created millions of microscopic layers, making the blade incredibly strong yet flexible enough to absorb impact without shattering. The edge was then hardened using a clay tempering technique, creating a blade that was both razor-sharp and nearly unbreakable. The result: a weapon that could cut through iron helmets, slash through armor, and even slice through the barrel of a rifle. There are documented tests from the Edo period where swordsmiths would demonstrate their blades' sharpness by cutting through stacks of bamboo, rolled tatami mats, or even the bodies of executed criminals. A masterwork katana could cut through 3 bodies in a single swing, but the katana's true lethality came from the techniques developed around it. Samurai trained in batojutsu, the art of drawing and cutting in one motion, could have their blade out and slashing across an opponent's body in less than a second. The draw was so fast that enemies often died before they could react. One famous technique, the rising strike, would begin with the sword sheathed. Then in one explosive motion, the blade would be drawn upward, cutting from the opponent's groin to their shoulder, bisecting them diagonally. The curved blade design was perfect for slashing. Unlike European straight swords that relied on thrusting, the katana was meant to be drawn across a target in a smooth, slicing motion. This cutting action was exponentially more damaging than a simple stab. A thrust might wound, but a deep katana slash would sever muscles, tendons, and arteries, often resulting in rapid death from blood loss or shock. What made the katana even more deadly was its versatility. It could be used one-handed or two-handed, for quick draws or sustained combat, for defense or offense. The long handle allowed for powerful, leverage strikes, while the balanced weight distribution made it fast enough for rapid combinations. A skilled samurai could parry an incoming attack and counterattack in the same motion, their blade flowing from defense to offense seamlessly. And then there was the psychological impact. The katana wasn't just feared for its physical capabilities, it carried a mystical reputation. Warriors believed the blade contained the spirit of its maker and the souls of those it had killed. To face a samurai with a legendary katana meant facing not just one warrior, but all the deaths that blade had dealt throughout its history. This psychological warfare was sometimes enough to make opponents surrender before a single blow was struck. The katana's legacy is one written in blood across centuries of Japanese history. From the Genpei War to the Sengoku period, from the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate to the final days of the samurai in the Meiji Restoration, the katana was there, cutting, killing, and carving its place as the most iconic weapon in human history. These 5 weapons, the kusarigama, the tanto, the wakizashi, the naginata, and the katana, weren't just tools of death. They were extensions of a warrior culture that elevated combat to an art form, where every strike carried centuries of tradition and every blade was a masterpiece of engineering and lethality. If you enjoyed uncovering these deadly secrets of samurai warfare, consider subscribing to explore more hidden histories that changed the world.